Y bueno, pues la sesión siguiente tiene formato entrevista. El foco de la temática es la financiación de la transición. Para esta sesión vamos a contar con la moderación de Yolanda Fernández. Bienvenida, Yolanda. Directora Stakeholders, Management and Public Affairs en EDP. Esta sesión va a ser híbrida porque nuestro ponente, Lord Adair Turner, Chair of the Energy Transition Commission, no nos ha podido acompañar. Además será en inglés, así que voy a cambiar de idioma. Voy a presentar muy brevemente a Yolanda. She's currently Director of Stakeholders Management and Public Affairs, as I said before, in EDP. With over 30 years of experience in the energy sector, she began the career as an auditor of energy companies at Arthur Andersen, and after that she joined Hidroeléctrica de Cantábrica, actualmente EDP, where she has held a range of different positions, including strategy studies, also was Director of Corporate Relations, Chief of Staff of the Chairman's Office, and Director of Environment and Sustainability. If everything is ready, I think if our guest is connected, I'll leave you in the best hands of Yolanda conducting the session. Thank you.
Muy bien, pues buenos días a todos. Como decía Ana, esta sesión tendrá lugar en inglés, así que voy a cambiar de idioma. First of all, many thanks to all the organizers, Enerclub, the Spanish Committee of the World Energy Council, and the Elcano Royal Institute, and also to Moeve for welcoming us into their home, and also for the sponsorship which EDP has joined this year. It's a real honor for me to moderate the interview with our distinguished guest, who unfortunately could not be with us in Madrid today, but was kind enough to join us via screen. Good morning, Lord Turner.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
We would like to thank you for accepting our invitation for participating in this event. And before I hand you over to speak, I would like to take a moment to introduce you to our audience. Adair Turner is a British businessman and academic who has held very significant positions in both the public and private sectors. Just to mention a few, he was the chairman of the UK's Financial Services Authority, where he played a leading role in the post-crisis redesign of global banking. He also served as the Director General of the Confederation of British Industry, chairman of the UK Low Pay Commission, and chairman of the Pensions Commission. In 2006, he became a cross-bench member of the House of Lords. And in the business world, Lord Turner worked at McKinsey & Co., was vice chairman of Merrill Lynch Europe, and served as non-executive director for several companies, including Standard Chartered plc. Although Turner's intellectual interests are broad, he has increasingly focused on climate change. In 2008, he was appointed as the first chair of UK's Climate Change Committee, a position he held until 2012. He is currently chair of the Energy Transition Commission, a global coalition of leaders from a range of organizations, energy producers, energy-intensive industries, technology providers, finance players, and environmental NGOs, committed to achieving net zero emissions by mid-century. We have kindly requested Lord Turner to explain the work of this commission, and in particular the main outcomes of one of his latest reports entitled Financing the Transition, How to Make the Money Flow for a Net Zero Economy. Since the focus of this event is on the EU, we have asked him to focus especially on Europe, explaining how to finance the massive investments that the transformation of the European economy will entail, and what are, under his point of view, the key priorities for increasing capital investments in this decade. Lord Turner, thank you again for accepting our invitation, and please, when you're ready, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. I'm sorry I can't be with you there in person, but very glad to join this discussion online. The Energy Transition Commission is, as you've said, a global coalition of companies, really from across the world and all sectors. But one of our members, one of our most active members, is Iberdrola from there in Spain. And I think it was through them that they recommended that I should join you for this meeting, and I'm very, very glad to do so. You've asked me to talk about the recent work that we have been doing in relation to financing the transition to a net zero scenario. And I'd like to do that by beginning at the global level and then coming down to the European level. If we could have the next slide, please. We have recently issued, ahead of COP29 in Baku next week, a document called NDCs, NCQG, and Financing the Transition, Unlocking Flows for a Net Zero Future. And of course, you may see there that there are two acronyms, which you may not necessarily know what they are. NDCs are nationally determined contributions, part of the Paris climate process. NCQG means New Collective Quantified Goal. And it is going to be extensively debated about Baku. And it's really about trying to identify how much climate finance should flow from the rich developed world to the developing. And there's going to be a very big debate about that at Baku. And I fear it's going to be a very confused debate because people often muddle up about 3 or 4 different things. There is investment that we require to actually build a zero carbon economy, actual capital investment. There is helping developing countries with adapting to the climate change which has already occurred. And there is loss and damage. So this is going to be a confused debate at a COP29. And there are very, very big differences in belief about how much money should flow from developed to developing countries. There are countries like India and some African countries have talked about trillions needing to flow. On the other hand, Donald Trump has just said that he's going to cut out the 3 billion per annum, 3 billion, not 3 trillion, which the US had promised to the UN Clean Climate Fund. So we exist in a very complex and a fraught global debate about flows of finance from the developed to the developing. But the absolute core of thinking straight about that debate is to be clear on what the numbers are and where the big numbers are. And if we can move to the next chart, the really big numbers are not in relation to adaptation or helping people deal with loss and damage. They are the actual investments that we need to build a zero carbon economy across the world in future. Can we move to the next slide? I think you are moving them. This should go to the next slide. This one. How much investment is needed to build the zero carbon economy of the world, rising from about $1 trillion in 2020 to reach 3 or 4 trillion by the 2030s and 40s. And the one thing I want to stress on this chart, and it's true in every part of the world, including Europe, is that the vast majority of the required investment is in the power sector. And it is in 3 elements, the sort of a turquoisey cover, the dark blue color, and the light blue cover. It is in power generation. It is really crucially also in power networks, both transmission and distribution. and it is increasingly in power storage and flexibility. And I want to make this point because often there's a lot of debate about, oh, how are we going to invest in new ships which burn ammonia or methanol, or how are we going to build new steel plants? Those are important, but as you can see from this chart, the total investment in those is an order of magnitude smaller than the investment in the power system. 2/3 of what we need to do to get to a zero carbon economy is to invest in a much bigger electricity system, an electricity system which across the whole of Europe will be twice as big as today, providing a much bigger share of final energy demand in the form of electricity, and to make sure that that is fully decarbonized. Now, the good news is that the IEA believes that the vast majority, believes that the level of investment has already gone up from about $1 trillion to about 1.7 trillion this year. So it is tracking along that line. But if I go to the next chart, that vast majority of that expenditure, that investment so far, are you able to move to the next chart? Right. Good. The vast majority of that investment so far has been in high-income countries and China. Now, that is where the need in the short term is greatest, but it is also crucial for us to unleash big investments in upper middle income countries and lower middle income countries, in India, in Indonesia, in Southeast Asia, in Latin America, if we are going to build a zero carbon economy at anything like fast enough. But let me now focus on the high income countries and in particular Europe. We are stepping up towards that level of investment, but it needs to accelerate faster. And how do you do that? In already rich developed countries, where should we expect this investment to come from? The crucial point I want to make is that the vast majority of the investment in Europe, as elsewhere in rich developed countries, will come from the private sector and will flow as long as we get other aspects of policy right. The aspects of policy should include, for instance, clear policies to drive the electrification of road transport, provided it is clear that the internal combustion engines will eventually be banned by 2035. The private sector will do the investment in the electric vehicle manufacturing plants and the battery manufacturing plants. But if I focus on the power sector, the crucial issue is clear power market design. It is clear strategic visions from the government of how rapidly power sectors are going to have to decarbonize. And it is clear structures of auctions for renewable energy, to make sure that some renewable energy can be developed on the basis of fixed price contracts rather than floating rate risk, but also increasingly well-designed power markets that ensure we are investing in, for instance, battery and other forms of storage alongside the generation. We also need, crucially, to ensure that real economy barriers like planning and permitting systems are reformed in order to make sure that we can build the generation, the transmission lines fast enough. But provided that is the case, the vast majority of the funding in rich developed countries like the whole of Europe will come from the private sector. But there is a role also, and Mario Draghi has talked about this in his recent report for the European Commission, there is also a role for public money, public infrastructure banks such as the European Investment Bank. And that role should be focused on the things that the private sector won't initially do. Things like first-of-a-kind developments of new industrial plant or first-of-a-kind developments of new forms of long-duration storage. But let me finish there. The crucial message is the absolute core within debates about global finance is the figures on this page. It's not loss and damage. It's not the idea that we pay reparations. It's how we get this investment done. In rich developed countries, the vast majority of this investment will come from the private sector rather than public, but there is a crucial role for public sector investment bank, infrastructure banks or balance sheets, alongside the most crucial thing, which is to have the structure of the real economy policies correctly designed to create the incentives for private investment. Let me finish there and take whatever questions you have. Thank you.
Okay, just one question, I think, regarding financing all these investments, and taking into account that this Monday in Baku will start the next COP29. How do you think that COP's meetings help to mobilize finances? And what can we expect from the upcoming COP regarding climate finance?
Well, I think what you can expect from the coming COP is a very confused debate, to be blunt. You go back to Copenhagen COP, which, if I remember right, it was COP 19, was it? Back in 2009. And in Copenhagen, the rich developed world made a promise that there would be $100 billion a year of climate finance flowing to poorer developing countries. But there was always huge confusion as to what that money was for and what that money was. Was it all about grants, or was it actually loans? Did it include the private sector? And we've had 15 years debate about what that 100 billion was and whether the rich developed countries really met it. The idea at COP is that there will be a decision, ideally, on this NCQG, new collected quantified goal. And as I said earlier, we start with just an enormous range of figures which people are suggesting. India and some African and other developing countries have talked about the need for several trillions a year of money to flow to the developing world. But as I said earlier, Donald Trump has said that he's going to cancel even the 3 billion, not trillion, but 3 billion, which the US has promised. So we're going to have a very confused debate. The crucial thing is to break it down and to separate what will deliver investment flows in mitigation capital investment to developing countries. And there, the crucial issue is not grants, it's not giveaways, it is what the multilateral development banks do alongside the private sector to unleash much larger capital investments in places like Indonesia, Brazil, the other countries of Southeast Asia. I hope, therefore, that at COP, amid all the debates about big figures and you should pay me, I should pay you, etc., that we will have an agreement to increase the capital resources available to the World Bank and the other development banks and to unleash that investment. I fear that what we will get is a communique which ends up with some sort of figure and some language in there, and then everybody goes back home from the negotiation and actually interprets the language in different ways. Our report, which we put in ahead of COP and which we will be arguing at for COP, is for clarity. If we're talking about helping loss and damage with grants, let's be clear what that is. It will not be a big figure because the rich developed countries just don't feel rich enough to ask their taxpayers to provide a large amount. But there'll be some for that, but you need to keep that completely separate from the huge flows, the flows that I've talked about in the 3.5 trillion figure and the ones you can see here that need to go to upper middle and lower middle income countries. That's where, from the ETC point of view, we hope that something valuable will come out of COP.
Okay, I think we are running out of time, so we are not going to have time for more questions. So thank you very much, Lord Turner, for joining us today and sharing such interesting insights. And I hand over to Anna to go on with the session. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Yolanda.